So the first thing I want to do is just to frame this a little bit before I show you what I'm going to talk about, is that this is only NSF's policies in data sharing and data access have really only formally been around for about 4 years. And I have been at NSF longer than NSF has been telling people that they need to be storing data. And so it's really, it's an amazing thing to see so rapidly how the world is changing when it comes to data. It's not changing fast enough, but it's getting there. It's trying fast. And I think that I'm going to talk a little bit about our data management policies. I'm going to talk a little bit about our very fresh off the presses data access policy. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about biostrategy when it comes to helping to enable the community use those policies, what our guidances are, and what are the things that we do to try to help that. So Phil's previous talk, you're going to hear a lot of the same things. I don't have the cool accent, but at least you will be hearing similar kinds of things coming out of me. Phil happens to be one of my PIs in one of the programs that I developed, and so that was pretty cool to, you know, to see that there's this strange connections between things that you can never get away from, especially in Washington. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about our data management plan. I'll talk about BIOS guidance that associated with that. All of the directorates have individual guidance, and it's really telling when you take a look at the different guidance how the different communities of science think about data and think about sharing and access. I'll talk about our strategy, and finally I will again talk about our public access plan, which will come kind of back around to the data management plan. So in addition to the memos that Phil talked about, the presidential memos, the memos from OSTP, this is framed with BIO has had a data sharing policy, or NSF has had a data sharing policy for a while. And in this, as you can see, that this is really that there is this fundamental understanding that in science works by us sharing our data. And that it shouldn't be very expensive to share the data, and that it should be both our primary data and our samples, physical collections, all of those things should be shared. Now our data management plan and our data access plan don't cover the physical specimens. We have other types of policies that we use for physical specimens, but certainly for the data, these policies are both coming out from a top-down mandate, a bottom-up from the community expecting to have access and the public expecting to have access, but also this is something that is ingrained in the culture of NSF. So in January of 2011 is when we started requiring all proposals to have a data management plan. So this is the policies and award, proposal and award policies guide. For those that aren't too familiar with NSF, just about every year a new one of these comes out, and the publication always has the name of which number in the year it came out. So for this particular one, it's 11-1, and the PAPPG is always number 1 of the year. So this year's is 15-1. There'll be next year's 16-1. So in 11-1, they had the first explicit details about a requirement for a data management plan. I want to talk a little bit about what that says in there. It's 2 pages of supplemental pages that are required. It's not part of the typical 15 pages of the proposal. And let me step back here before I keep going with this and say that this is the first time that it was formalized for all proposals. That doesn't mean it was the first time that data management plans were at NSF. So for example, one of the programs I run is Advances in Biological Informatics. So we fund databases, we fund software development, we fund tools for research. We've had data management plans since the inception of the program, and we've required PIs to submit those. But we required PIs to submit those as part of the 15 pages. So for programs like me, this is awesome because now we give the PIs an extra 2 pages where they can formalize and really discuss what it is that they plan to do with their data, how they're going to be deposited, et cetera. The other thing about this is there are only a couple of really hard stops at NSF that prevent you from further submitting a proposal when you're going through FastLaneResearch.gov. This is one of them. And so that means is that if you're in Fastlane and you're trying to push a button and you didn't upload a data management plan, it won't let you keep going. And so that's actually quite exciting because that means that they all will have them. If you get by putting in a blank page and it gets to the program and it's a blank page, it gets returned without review. So we will not, there's no exception. You have to have some kind of data management plan in every proposal that goes in. Data management plan covers both original data and metadata. It also covers software and code. Those are also considered data, and so that's also very nice. The types of things it asks for are details on how the data are going to be managed, how they're going to be disseminated, and they also want to know your past performance. And so what have you done with your data before? And these data management plans and what you do with the data management plans, in theory, will be used downstream for seeing if you did what you were supposed to do and keeping that as part of a review criteria down the road. And the general intent here is that the description should be enough for the merit reviewers, the reviewers to be able to look at this and see that the results could be duplicated. Results could be replicated using the data, or at least an attempt to replicate those based on what you've put in your data management plan. So once the data management plan requirement came out, all of the directorates came up with their own guidance for, okay, so what do we expect for the bio community when we see this data management plan? The cool thing about this, I think, is that this is very democratic. And so this is how bio sees the world. Basically, bio says that bio is really diverse. We embrace diversity, and we recognize that every subdiscipline of bio has their own standards. And so for all of us who are working with faculty members that are working with researchers who are trying to do the right thing with their data, we all know that everybody has a different way of doing it, right? That's why we say about standards, they're so great because there's so many of them, right? And so we see that there's a lot of diversity. We see that there's a lot of diversity in terms of the accepted norms for timeliness. And so some may think that 6 months is you should be getting your data out there in 6 months. Some may say 5 years. They depend on what kind of data they are, what not only the products, but what the field is. And so instead of bio saying you must, bio says, it's really up to the community. It's up to the community to determine what the standards and best practices are, and it's up to the PI in their data management plan to both know what those best standards and best practices are and to adhere to those and to follow those and to make the case in the data management plan that that's exactly what they're doing. And so that essentially, here's the link if you want to follow along to that data management plan. But that's the gist of the big picture of what bio thinks about of data management. But that's not incredibly helpful when it comes to writing a proposal. I mean, it's great, but let's give you a little bit more. Let's talk about a little bit more help here. So there are 5 guiding principles that bio really says, these are the kind of things that we would really like for you to provide to the reviewers so that when we are looking at these data management plans, we should be able to at least pull out these kinds of information. So we want to see a description of the data collected, the metadata formats and standards. And again, those are community dependent. Those are subdiscipline dependent. Describe the data storage. How are you going to store the data? How are you going to preserve the data? What facilities are going to use? And this shouldn't just be for the life of the project, but it should be after the project's over, right? So where are those data going to live? How are you going to store them? How are you going to disseminate those data? And especially after the project's over, how are you going to continue to disseminate that? What's the sustainability plan for those data? We want to see the description of data sharing and public access policies. We want to see things like intellectual property and confidentiality and privacy and security. All of those things are not things that should be left out. We want to see all those in those data management plans. And we would like to see roles and responsibilities. Whose job is it to make sure that these things persist? Right? And that also includes things like contingency. What happens if your mirror site goes down, do you know what a mirror site is? I mean, those are the kinds of things that we're hoping to see in the plans. And so this is just sort of the high level guidance that we give to the PIs when it comes to writing those. Keep in mind this is only 2 pages, right? And so this in theory sounds really good, but having to do this plus understanding that communities are different, putting that all in 2 pages can actually get a little tricky if it's done right. So the other thing that bio does is, well, we look at these things. We're certainly supposed to look at these things, right? Especially once you have an award. So every year that if someone has a NSF award, there's yearly reporting requirements, and those annual reports come in. And annually, bio's guidance is that we are looking for specific things. So every year in the annual reports, we're looking for how you are making progress in your reporting. So do you have identifiers? Have you given us those identifiers? Can you tell us the accession numbers? Can you give us number of citations? And for some of our larger projects where there is a lot of data, particularly when it's a concerted effort to capture and store a lot of data, we ask for additional, tables and figures and things that actually give us those numbers. And we will, at least, in my practice as a program officer, I'll go track those things down and make sure that they're there. In the final reports, we really want to see how was that implementation, how was that data management plan implemented. We want to see the data. We want to see how those data are planned to be retained post-award. We want to see verification of dissemination and sharing of those data. We also want to, we want to see what did you end up with in terms of the format for your metadata and your data, and then where are they going to stay long term. And in theory, we will use those results downstream as part of, when future proposals come in, there should be a results of prior support section that talks about how those data were stored, and we should be able to go find them, right? And that's the idea. So I want to talk a little bit about biostrategy, and part of this strategy is including in here is this award management, and it's also assessment. And so I'm going to talk the difference between sort of the theory and then the practice, right? Of course. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the, one of the really nice things about being at NSF is we spend a whole lot of time strategizing, right? And so we do implementing, but we do an awful lot of strategizing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we've come up with, and how, as Phil was talking about, that is, it's one thing to have policy, it's another thing to really engage the community and think about workforce development and think about standards development and thinking about doing these in a very democratic way. And we have to recognize that we have to be a partner in that. We've got to be providing the resources to be able to have some of those things happen. So one of the things we do during, as part of the award management process is we use award letter language and conditions. So for many of the informatics proposals that I fund, especially those that have a large data capture or annotation part, we actually put language in the award that says you will put your data in this place. And if you don't put your data in that place, we're not going to give you more money. And so that gives us the teeth to be able to say, hey, you know what? I don't have to release the next increment of this proposal because they didn't do what they said they were going to do by X amount of time. It's not something we use a lot, but when it's a situation where we feel like it's really critical that we make sure that those data are put into a place. And I think that we will see a growing trend to have those kinds of things being done. One of the reasons we don't do it as much is because we don't like to mandate where you must put your data. And so often when you put award language in, you're actually having to do some sort of mandate. So I'm going to talk about a program where we do this mandating, and there's a specific reason why we do that, so I will try to remember when I get there to come back to this. So you're going to see that all I'm talking about here, majority of this stuff is actually very centered around my experiences at NSF, and so I'm involved in a lot of this, and so I'm going to keep coming back to things that I happen to manage because I was the one that got to give the talk. So these are examples of things we're doing, but I'm using examples from just my world. Okay, so in this Advances in Biological Informatics program that I run, a couple of years ago we put an additional track into the solicitation looking for sustainability awards. And in that sustainability awards, these are so the way that the program works is that we're funding the development of resources tools, things like databases, things like software. So we have an innovation track where it's those new cutting edge algorithms that are going to do the next great thing. We don't expect those to be off-the-shelf software. We expect those to be proof of concept and things where people can try it out and get the research community to really like this thing and see what we can do. Okay, so that's kind of a small but smaller grants, large part of our portfolio, pretty high risk. Then we've got this bigger hunk, which is development proposals. And those are those software projects where the software is actually being used quite a bit as the proof of concept, but now we really want to harden it. We want to broaden it to a much bigger audience. We want to really put in the bells and whistles that the community is asking for, that's really going to make their software work better. So that's our development. And we were finding that, there's some things like the protein data bank or like GenBank, those kinds of things where we don't want to do a lot of new development on those things. What we really want to do is just keep them alive. And without having, there's not a lot of places where you can just keep stuff alive at NSF. You can ask for money to keep things alive. And so we were kind of saying, okay, build something really awesome and then get the community to use it and then don't ask us again for money. So we decided, we really shouldn't be doing that. We should actually be doing some level of at least life support to keep these things alive, that they can then come up with some other kind of like a cost recovery model or a pay per service model or something that will help build up some of the other potential resource development they want to do. But let's at least put in some kind of sustaining track so that we can evaluate these, or we can support these kinds of the tools that are really critical. But in our evaluation of those tools, one of our major criteria is, how are you supporting the data use of the community? Are you storing data? Are people using those? How is it accessible? Who's using them? So we go into the data management plans and we see how many times has your resource been cited. So we're using the data management plans now to see if these resources really are critical for the support of NSF funded bioresearch by looking at the data management plan to look for those names. And then another award management strategy we often use is what's called a cooperative agreement. And so most awards made at NSF are just grants. And grants are great because you just say, okay, you tell me what you think you're going to do. I agree that I think that that's a pretty good strategy. Here's the money, now go do it. And at the end, you can come back and say, well, I kind of did what I said I was going to do, but it was a proposal. It wasn't a contract. And so there's some give and take in that. Cooperative agreement is really different because that says, okay, I agree to give you money, you agree to work with me, and we'll try together to get this stuff done. And so with a cooperative agreement, every year we can renegotiate some of the requirements, and we tend to use these for the bigger things, and we can work, because we can work together, we can have more specific conversations about things like, all right, you know what, it would be really good, the community is clamoring for standardization in XYZ workflows for data ingestion. Let's put that as part of what we're going to do next year. And so we can work with the PIs to kind of rethink some of the yearly work packages, and that really helps. And so the two big ones I'm going to talk about, that I promised to talk about, are both under cooperative agreements. And so we have a much stronger relationship and ability to work as co-managers on some of those projects, which is really nice. Another big thing that happened in the last couple of years is that bio underwent a huge assessment of data management plans and activities. Melissa Cragen, who is a AAAS fellow at NSF and comes from the library community, has stayed on for an extra year working the front office, working on this project. So she's working on publishing it, so I'm not going to step on her intellectual property toes. But what I am going to do is at least give you a couple of highlights and tell you how critical this project is, and how we're using the information that she's doing. So stay tuned. You'll see some of these results coming down the pipe eventually in publication. But essentially, Melissa and another person at NSF, Tony Keck, who's no longer at NSF, did an analysis of data management plans over a period of several years that came into NSF, and eventually it amounted to over 15,000. So they looked at a lot of data management plans. And they looked in those data management plans for those 5 guidance items that came from bio. Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Et cetera. And they came up with some really amazing results as to who is doing it, who isn't doing it, what are the primary resources that are being used, what are the kinds of data that are being used, where do we see places where we could help guide the community better, where are the communities doing phenomenally, and that those parts of the community could help with their lessons learned to help the other parts of the community. And so this is going to be an awesome document for where we go forward from this with this information. But that was just, those are the static documents. They did the text mining, they did the evaluation, but there's more to the story than that. What about the program officers? So you have program officers that know these communities. They know the resources, they know the people, they know the data. I mean, most of the program officers are coming from science. They were the researchers themselves. I still have an active research plan, so I know the research in my community. And so they did surveys of all the program officers in bio and said, what are the data resources? What are your needs? What are the kinds of data that your community produce? What does it mean to have a publication in your subdiscipline? Do your PIs get credit for publishing data or annotating data or contributing to data resources? And here is another, again, a huge wealth of information that that is now being summarized, and we're looking at that. And that, for me, as the informatics person who's storing, is trying to support these databases, that's like, oh yeah, this is so cool. Because now I can see where people are actually putting their data, where the program officers think that people are putting their data. And then I have the data management plans where I can say, and here's where they really are putting their data. And so now I can say, okay, so how do I use this information when it comes to thinking about supporting research resources in a sustainable way downstream. And then they also just did a sample. They just randomly picked a program, kind of randomly picked a program that generates a lot of data. And they said, for this particular program, and this is a program much like the informatics program where data management plans have been something that's part of the culture for a while. It's not just a 4-year thing. But for this particular program, this is long-term ecological research. Let's look at the data management plans from years ago. Let's look at the annual reports. Let's look at those final reports. Let's look at the new data management plans. And let's really delve down into the weeds and see if these guys were doing what we had hoped they were doing in terms of the data management plans. And then using this information to see how we could potentially use this when it comes to our award management and that sort of thing. So this is a work in progress. I think it's a great work. I think it's awesome that we have this information. I can't tell you much about how we are currently going to use it or what we're doing. I can tell you how I would use it. I think I already have. But soon, keep tuned. I think you'll hear a lot more about this. And I suspect 4 or 5 years from now, someone from NSF who may come back and give a talk will tell you how we use this stuff for really changing our practices. We love division. We love division. We love to joint vision. We love to vision independently with the community. Bio's vision, current vision for how we handle big data issues is called biodata. And this is actually a culmination of a number of different visioning exercises that we've done. The particular thing that's really nice about this is kind of all what I've just been talking about is that Bio sees that data issues aren't just data issues, they're people issues, they're community issues, they're storage issues, they're infrastructure issues. And biodata encompasses all of that. And so as Bio is moving forward with biodata, the vision, it's really embracing getting everybody on the same page, trying to get people to understand that this is something we must go forward with now and that we want to do that. And engage other parts of the foundation because we have a whole directorate of computer science and engineering computer science information that does this kind of stuff. And there's a division within them of advanced cyber infrastructure, and they have advisory group, and they're doing a lot of support for things. Turns out that a couple of years ago we did a portfolio analysis of Bio, and Bio spent $90 million on cyber infrastructure for Bio. And when we do joint activities, often our joint activities will partner with SAIS. We probably spent about $5 million in joint activities with SAIS. So we're doing a huge amount of cyber infrastructure development, but we recognize that cyber infrastructure development, much of which of it surrounds data, really needs to be driven by best practices. And those best practices, this is who we can do that with. We can find opportunities and gaps by working with the folks in advanced cyber infrastructure through those partnerships that are more generalizable and scalable and ubiquitous, but also just getting best practices from them. So in a couple of weeks, the Bio Advisory Committee, which is the community board that comes in and gives Bio advice about where we should be moving forward, is going to meet with the same type of board for the advanced cyber infrastructure division. And the nice thing about this is we're going to talk about some of Bio's major data infrastructure investments and talk about where are the priorities, where are the gaps, how can we partner in such a way that we can rapidly move forward, but not only for Bio, but for science in general, for big data issues in general. So I think this is going to be a really, really powerful meeting, and I'm lucky to be part of this. I'll be able to talk about one of those cooperative agreements, and I really look forward to seeing how this is going to go. And hopefully we'll see some really nice things coming out of this in terms of downstream partnerships. just going to give you a smattering of investments that we've put some money into recently, simply, and this is just picking out from the portfolio today, right? There's a whole bunch more. There's a bunch where we have partnered with ACI. These are just coming out of bio, and it just so happens that these are ones where I'm one of the managing program officers. So again, I'm pulling things out of my experience. We currently have a program in the Division of Environmental Biology, which is also a joint program with GEO, called Go Life, Genealogy of Life. And the intent of this is to help support data collection for a large-scale cyber infrastructure for integration of data and information for supporting comparative biology across scales and across levels and across taxa. So huge, basically leafing out the entire tree of life is the intent of this program. And it really focuses strongly on capturing and annotating heterogeneous data, multiple different kinds of data. In fact, to even be competitive, a project has to have at least, more than one type of data that are being captured. And so it's a really exciting program. And it works, the part of the reason that I'm on this program is because as the informatics person from a different division, they want to make sure that we have a lot of crosstalk between the data resources and the things that we're funding to help support this, and then also the data that actually being captured. And so we have a lot of back and forth discussions about how those data can be best served and how we can, meet the needs of those communities. Another thing that I'm really excited about that we've been doing, and this comes into the workforce development question that we heard before from Sarah, was in the ABI program, we have supported a number of workshops looking at sustainability of biological resources, and that sustainability certainly includes things like long-term data storage and access and interoperability. And as a result of several of these workshops, Cliff Duke, who is the head of the Ecological Society of America, proposed to do a peer-based training course for those people that are developing biological resources, so directors of big biological resources, things like this X database or X cyber infrastructure center. And the idea here is to have them come up with business plans and models so that they can think about how to best keep their resources sustainable. So we're now in our third year of this particular training module that they've been developing, and it's really remarkable. So when I first came to NSF, I was the classic academic, head in the clouds. I knew absolutely nothing about project management, yet I was funded to do a whole bunch of ontology development, database development, three-dimensional reconstructions of anatomy, things that I had to build these big resources and share data and interact, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I came to NSF, and they give me this big program and say, okay, now you're in charge, now you have to tell people how to do this stuff. So all right, I need to take some classes. I don't know what I'm doing. So I ended up working on project management classes, and NSF's great about saying, you need the training, go do it. And so, they just said, go to GW, take a bunch of classes, figure out how to be a project manager, and see if you can use this information to help the community. And that's basically what this course is. And so they've got a bunch of people with project management training who really understand things like risk registers and scheduling and cost control and Gantt charts and all of those different things, and putting all of that into the framework of an academic software development project or database development project has really been a remarkable transformation in the community. You can see it already just in the last couple of years, how these resources are now starting to talk to each other and share best practices, and they're thinking about how do we, wow, we actually need GUIDs, we actually need DOIs, we actually need standards for things that we do. And it's just seeing them, make such a rapid transformation in how the community is interacting has really been startling. And I think part of it is because of training things like this. It's really quite amazing. And just a couple of other things that NSF is responsible for U.S. involvement in a lot of global data sharing type activities, things like the Global Biodiversity Information Facility and the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And so we do play a role in facilitating a number of those types of activities. The reason this is important, though, is largely because we partner with other agencies. We partner with the State Department. We partner with others where we are do have a little bit of a role in at least making sure that our PIs are represented, the US PIs are represented when it comes to thinking about things like data sharing, for example. And that's a really critical one when we think about data access across international borders. We all know that that's a very challenging one. And so having the NSF PI, bio PI community being least represented in some of these, I think is really good. It's not just happening at a top level, it's happening all the way through, up and down. Recently, since the public access plan came out, we have a number of workshops that we supported, and these workshops, actually, the money came from the group that was developing the public access workshops. So this is really nice that Bio is running them. They're for bio PIs, they're for bio issues, but it's really an investment from other parts of the foundation to make sure that all of the directorates are able to really be able to do this. And so here's just a list of some of this is just this year. These are workshops that are going on. And you can see that these workshops, the idea is to get the peers, a lot of people from different groups coming together. I can give you more information about those, but those are the award numbers. So you can just look them up if you want to. I've been to at least 2 of them. And so I can tell you sort of how some of these worked. I think we've only had 2 so far. So. And then a couple of the big things, I finally got to the cooperative agreements that I do want to talk about, and I think I'm probably going to start hitting our break here soon. I'll kind of speed up a little bit. Yeah, all right. So just to give you a flavor of the kind of things that we're doing. So this is the Integrated Digitized Bio Collections Project. This is one of the strategies that Bio has taken in terms of supporting a large community effort for integrating data. And the nice thing about this is it takes a hub and spoke model. So we have a center that aggregates the data, does data storage, cloud storage, points to the data. But there's last count I think was 283 institutions, small museums around the country that are digitizing their collections, and they're giving those data to this resource. And so instead of saying, okay, we're going to do a top-down approach where we say give all the money to them and they go around the country and they collect all the data, we're actually getting all these small museums to start doing their own data collection, and then they become part of the process. They become ownership. There's ownership into this process, and their data all get come in. So here's where we use both the cooperative agreement approach and we use award conditions. In this instance, I use award conditions for every one of those 283 awards to make sure that they put their data into iDigBio and they put it in such a way that we can have all those data integrated. And we're talking about things like pictures and metadata, like GIS information and sounds, and so there's all kinds of different types of data, and all those data have to come here to iDigBio to serve them. Another approach is the iPlant Collaborative. This is iPlant is a really neat thing because it's basically a portal into high-performance computing for people that don't need to know how to use high-performance computing. It's both a data store and the ability to use tools that access high-performance computing. And the idea is to try to provide these really super high-power resources for folks that may not necessarily be trained to be able to code to use them. And so iPlant has really transformed the way that biology, not just plant biology, is being done, but biology in general, because it's such a really impressive cyber infrastructure. And in addition to having the iPlant has a data store, and they have cloud storage, and they're now moving a lot of their high-performance computing tools to the cloud, so that instead of having to pull your data down to use those tools, you can just use your tools in the cloud where your data are, and then we don't have to worry about so much of the input-output slowing down process. I'm happy to talk about all of this, but I'll move around a little bit, finally to get to our public access policy. So 2 weeks ago, NSF released the public access policies. Fresh off the presses, you're one of the first groups to actually have someone come and talk about the public access policy. This is document number 15-52, 52nd document of the year to be released. So I would strongly suggest you go look at it. It's really an impressive document. It really has a lot of background, a lot of history. It talks about some of the governmental top-down suggestions and memos that are reasons why this came to be, but it also talks about how NSF thinks about data and thinks about access to data. Just to frame a little bit, there are a lot of, depending upon your perspective, requirements, or in other perspectives, constraints about how this is going to work. And really these were, I mean, bottom line is we want the public to be able to get to these data. Right? We want public to be able to get to data, the results of NSF awards, data, publications, et cetera. But we don't want to put a large burden on the PIs or on NSF. We really don't want to pay a lot for it. And we want to make sure that the workflows work the way that they always work, like they work right now, or at least somewhat like, so that the PI really isn't overburdened with having to learn to do things. The people who are looking for these publications don't have to learn to do things, and that we leverage the existing things that we do, and that downstream we're expecting this is not just publications, but it's going to be all kinds of data products, and so that's really what we're doing. So in a lot of ways, it's similar to what Phil was talking about in terms of the data commons, but we're taking maybe a slightly different, a more democratic approach a little bit when it comes to some of the things. Basically, overviews of this as of next January, any NSF award that is submitted starting in January of next year will be required, if it is an award, that within 1 year of publication of any publication coming from that award, that publication must be uploaded into a public database for public access. There's possibilities to waive. There is a waiver option for that 12-month embargo, but that's, then there's a review process for that. The data management plans that I talked about already, that stays the same. The ability to ask for money to help publish, that stays the same. How data are cited, et cetera, that all stays the same. But it does call for community engagement to especially in terms of identifiers, metadata, standards, those things. So in addition to just saying, okay, now you have to do this, now we want to talk about it. Let's talk about how we're going to do this. Let's see how it's going to implement. Let's see if it's going to work. And I'll tell you a bit, just in 1 second, I'm going to show you one more slide that shows you how it's going to happen. It does leverage current policies, programs, and systems. So there's not a lot addition to this. One of the things that it's leveraging is the Department of Energy's Pages site, and that's where currently the publications will reside. There will be a working group that's looking at this. There is a working group that will be following along and assessing this. There's a website that has the plan, the feedback, FAQs, and there will be updates and evaluations, et cetera, but bottom line, it's going to be for not just publications, but it will be for other kinds of data. Okay, and so it is definitely a work in progress. It just happened, and they've been talking about it for about a year. We just published. I would be remiss as a database person if I didn't at least show you some kind of flow chart with little database signals. And this is just a general idea of basically what's going to happen. And so you need 4 pieces of information for the principal investigator to have. Their credentials, their award number, a DOI that comes from a publisher, and then a copy of the paper in a PDF format. All the details about how that and how are you going to deal with the issues of public access from the journal, et cetera, it's all in the report. I'm the messenger. So please read the report. I'm happy to answer questions. We can probably do most of those offline after break or during break. But basically, this is what it does. It goes into research.gov, and once it's in research.gov, it's going to be stored. The storage will actually be in the DOE pages, but basically, it's going to seamlessly work through research.gov. So the way that we can get things like abstracts right now out of NSF awards, the way that I already get publications from the PIs. One of the reporting requirements, if you have NSF award, is you're supposed to send me you're supposed to send the program officer copies of your papers. And so I do get those. We just don't publish them, right? And so all this does is makes those more transparent. Okay. And then the public will be able to see them, and that's basically, this is the general approach. So I'll stop there. If we have any time for questions, happy to answer. Or you can find me. I'll be here for the day. So I'm happy to answer then. Any questions? Sure. Good. I get 2. So you want to start? Yeah. Good.
I was wondering if you know of any or how many proposals have been rejected because of condition DMP.
That's a really good question. I can tell you from my personal experience, I've rejected at least 4. Yeah, over in the last course of the last 2 years. Yeah, and part of that is because it was like a project that said in the document it says this is a software development project. We do not require a DMP. It's like, yeah, you do. Yeah, I had another question.
One thing we were looking at in the new OSTP memo,
Yep.
We haven't seen those
Yep.
really spelled out yet. I know this isn't the final policy. It is sort of a plan.
It's a plan in progress, right? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that we part of that is that it is fairly new. It is moving the community toward the understanding of this is really critical before you just start saying thou shalt. And I think that that includes program officers. Thinking especially at NSF, think about half of our program officers are rotators, and so they're coming in for a year or two into from the community. And so there's two cultural issues there. One is that they're part of the community and they don't like to be told thou shalt, and the other thing is that they're just trying to figure out how not to go to jail. I mean, it's for the first 6 months, right? And so add to that I think we're now really recognizing that this is really critical for us to start using. And so I think that with some of the things, for example, that we're doing in bio with this assessment plan, and once we see the data and we say, you know what, we really need to be working harder at making sure that we use these documents that we have in front of us as critical parts of that review process and critical part of our post-award management. I think you will see the culture shifting as you see the non-NSF culture shift. But I think that you have to be careful when you do that because we don't want it to be a top-down mandate. We do want it to be community engagement, and we don't want to say you must put your data here, you must put your data, or you must use these standards. And as those standards are evolving, then we can have those richer conversations that will drive our practices as well. Yeah. But I believe me, I would love to. But I think we all know that that's not the best thing to do.
So. Had this policy for so long, you just kind of see them drifting down into checkbox. There seems to be a plan there, fine.
Yeah. And I think that is something that I will say I put some of the onus on myself, for example, in bio, that it's important for me as someone who supports the resources that could potentially be being cited in these to make sure that I do enough in-reach to the program officers to make sure that I say, these are the things that really, in terms of best practices, these are the kinds of things that we'd really like to see, and they're looking at something like, oh no, is it SourceForge or GitHub now? Which one are they supposed to use? And it's like, but at least they're not saying, Dropbox. And so, it's those kinds of things where those are I think it's hard to say to a science program officer, these are the kind of things we expect you to think about. So I think that as we do more in-reach and we start saying, you want your PIs to be saying, these are the standards in the community. These are the reasons that I choose to use these standards. These are where I'm going to put my data. And I think that's what I would like to see is that if people really did follow those guidances where they really had a rich discussion in their project management plan where they said why it was that they were doing what they're doing, I think that would actually help the community even review these in a better way. Yeah.
So for the past couple of years, many science librarians and social science librarians have been working on data management plans with their faculty and research. So I'm just talking about the past couple of years. Many of us have been working with data management plans and also perhaps getting into responsible conduct for research and education. Where else do you see librarians working with what you want, where you want to head now in terms of compliance and sustainability, et cetera?
I think that's phenomenal. I think that's the area where exactly what you just said is what I would like to see, me personally, is to see when we have a PI who just collects data, right? They're just, okay, I'm going to collect these data, and I don't know what to do with the data. Who tells them what to do with those data? On the one hand, if it's your community, you should have some sense of what the resources are out there. But I really think that there is still a community that needs some guidance, needs some help for those resources. And anything that you can do to help make your researchers at your institutions more aware of just the fact that there are such things as standard best practices and that each community has different ways of doing things, and how would you go about finding that information? So that kind of outreach to your research community is invaluable. And this kind of thing, just saying, NSF actually does have guidance. There's that data management plan guidance. How does a PI know to go find that? And when they look at those 5 items, do they know those 5 items are there? And how would they be able to answer those 5 items? And so those are the kind of things that I think sometimes they don't even know that it's there. And even though we posted broadly on the bio, it's NSF bio and its guidance for the data management plans. But you have to go do that first. And I was one of those PIs, was like, you know what, I've got 4 grants I have to write in the next 6 months, and I look at the solicitation and I figure out how to make the project I want to do kind of look like it's going to fit that program. And I think that having that transformation where we actually recognize there's a lot of information out there that has to be digested and distilled down, and guiding them, that would be phenomenal. So more of the same, I guess. Yeah.
Quick question. Michael Witt from Purdue University. Thanks for a great talk.
Yeah.
On one of your last slides, you showed a diagram relating to author manuscripts being deposited into an NSF public repository.
Mm-hmm.
Many of our libraries have invested heavily in promoting open access and have our own institutional repositories. Will these be seen as an acceptable alternative to centralized repository?
That's a good question. It's probably in the plan. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you that, but I would say go read the data access plan, and I suspect, and that is also something that's evolving. I wish I could tell you that off the top of my head. Yeah, and so I've read the 38 pages, but I'm not that close. Yeah, thank you. Everyone, yeah.
Hi, I'm Kara from Bowdoin College. My perspective of your talk's a little bit different because I'm a director of responsive research. I'm a grants officer. And so my question is whether or not the data management plan will ever be part of the peer review process or go through its own layer where those comments are part of the summary statement that's sent back to PIs. That's just something I've been looking for when I get the comments. And I haven't seen anything yet.
It is and should be. Currently, it is part of the peer review process. So, for example, in the programs, some of the programs I run, in our summaries that go back to the PI, we have data management plan right in there, and we have the reviewers comment on the data management plan. That hasn't been a rule at NSF, so there's no rule that says that the program has to explicitly talk about the data management plan in the project summary. So the PI may or may not get those feedback. But in terms of our best practices, it is something, and that's why they're there. We do evaluate the data management plans as part of the review process. Again, it's still fairly new. It's still getting the community up to using them and getting familiar with them and looking at the guidance and using that. And I think this type of assessment that we've done in bio, saying, okay, now let's take a look at what it is that we hoped that we were getting and how we were using this information and what are we really doing. And I think that those are the kinds of things that they're changing our internal culture as much as they're changing the external culture. So yes, thank you. That's exactly what we are hoping for. That's what you asked. Yeah.
Mandated for years and then voluntary before that. And they've had, are there ever discussions at that level to sort of bring some of these things together? And I think in terms of a library managing all the information, how inefficient it was for people to have to go to multiple libraries to ever find what they need. And science being so collaborative nowadays, are there talks or thoughts along those lines of how these things can work together and what lessons people can learn? Just curious.
Yes, there are talks. There are discussions. There are surprisingly a lot of discussions. I'll be frank and I'll say the reality of government, unfortunately, is it sometimes works at the speed of plate tectonics. And so sometimes it takes a lot of conversations. There's a number of reasons for not the least of which is that one of the great things about some of our agencies is that we have a lot of rotators, and so that always brings new and fresh and diverse ideas in, but it also means that there's oftentimes a lack of institutional memory. And so that means that just about the time that you finally get to something where you're really moving forward and the personnel changes. And so then you have to start all over again. And it's not just for the federal agencies, it's the government, right? I mean, that's the point of our government, is that we always have, different representation. That being said, it is very much, it is recognized at all levels at in the federal government that these are the kinds of conversations we should be having and we should be partnering with. And so there are interagency groups that have these conversations. And so I'll take out of the public access, I'm going to talk about collections, because I'm also a part of an interagency working group on scientific collections. And so this is a group where we meet monthly, and we talk about the issues surrounding public access of information about biological collections data, or all collections, not just biological. And we have actually made great strides to make all that collections information available across the government. And now part of my role as being on that is that we have all of these non-federal collections that are being digitized at that iDigBio site, and how does that play a role with integrating with the federal? And so it's slow, but those kinds of things absolutely happen. It happens at the top level. Having Phil at NIH is phenomenal, because he's also an NSF PI. And so we know him, and that helps a lot. But the program officers also talk, and sometimes it's that grassroots effort, especially for the folks that are a little more persistent. So I'm a permanent Fed, so I'll be there, until I retire, I hope. And so we do have those conversations, and we remember those conversations, and we forge those relationships. And that kind of grassroots community building also can be the foundation for a lot of things. So, but thank you. That's a really good question, and I wish it moved a lot faster, because I think that, I think I'd like it to move faster. On the other hand, we do have very different approaches. If you saw the approach that NIH is taking and the approach that NSF is taking, NSF definitely, we're taking this, yeah, but it's you guys, it's your community, it's your data. You tell us how you want us to tell you how to use your data, And so, and I think that NIH is also doing some of that, but they also have both a bigger carrot and a bigger stick, perhaps. Yeah. 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 I can tell you a little about it, because it's so new, and it is. I'm the messenger, I'm not one of the architects. But what I can tell you is that they have been working on the implementation before they came out with the policy. And so they've already had the partnerships with the DOE pages, and so the stuff is in place, the infrastructure is in the process of working, the working groups have been working, they've actually been working on this for more than a year. And it will become policy with the 2016 PAPPG, which is being written right now. And so you have to start doing it in April in order to get it released in January. So it will become implemented from everything that gets submitted from January on. And then you figure there's going to be a lag time unless somebody's really proficient and they can crank out a publication in a month. Then there's still a year process from the time that they have so I would imagine that if you think about just how long it takes to submit an NSF grant, get it through review, get it funded, collect some data, and then you still have 12 months before that publication from publication of that publication, before it goes into the database. That the first publications you're probably not going to be seeing at least till probably 2017, maybe end of 2016, but more likely 2017, I would imagine. Yeah, and they are discussing this. I mean, and part of those the workshops that I showed, at least one of them was a lot of publishers. I mean, there were a lot of people from publishers and from the library community that were involved in those workshops. And so these are things that we're having these conversations with. I wish I could tell you more than that, but some of that is outlined in the document. And so it's really a great document. I was really amazed to see there's such a rich history that's listed in there. There's a lot of really good footnotes. Some of it I'm touting it because a lot of them were like awards that I made, and so it's totally me. And so, but I think it is really, and I had nothing to do with writing it. It's just a cool document. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much.